Today we're going to talk about a machine that was, for all intents and purposes, perfect. A code that was believed to be absolutely unbreakable. And we're going to talk about the simple, predictable, and very human habits that brought the whole thing crashing down. This is the incredible story of the Enigma code.
Let's just start with this number. It's 158 quintillion. That's the number of possible ways the German military's Enigma machine could be set up on any given day. For the Nazis, this number was a shield. It meant their communications were invincible. For the Allies, well, trying to crack that wasn't like looking for a needle in a haystack. It was like trying to find one specific atom in the entire known universe. The scale is just staggering.
And this quote, this really gets to the heart of the whole story. Enigma's mathematical fortress, this wall of numbers, it had a secret back door. But this door wasn't built out of circuits or rotors. It was built out of human nature, boredom, laziness, routine. The machine itself was a masterpiece of engineering. The people using it, well, they were just people. And that was the fatal flaw.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with this so-called invincible machine and see why everyone thought it was so tough. Then we'll meet the brilliant minds who actually cracked it. After that, we'll dig into the real core of the story, the human flaw. We'll also touch on the heavy price of keeping this secret, the absolutely tragic story of Alan Turing, and finally, what the Enigma story can still teach us today.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The machine itself. What was it about the Enigma that made the German High Command so incredibly confident, so certain that it was completely unbreakable?
At its core, you can think of the Enigma machine as a kind of supercharged, incredibly complex typewriter. It actually started out as a commercial product, but the German military saw its potential, adopted it, and then massively beefed up its security. Every single time an operator pressed a key, it sent an electrical pulse through this dizzying maze of scrambling rotors and wires, turning a plain letter into what just looked like complete gibberish on a light-up display.
And that brings us back to this just mind-boggling number, over 158 quintillion combinations. You have to understand, trying to guess the right setting by brute force was completely out of the question. Even with the fastest theoretical machine, it would have taken billions and billions of years, literally longer than the universe has existed. This mathematical wall was everything. It's what gave the Nazis this absolute sense of total security.
But of course, it wasn't unbreakable. And that brings us to the code breakers. Now, this is a story that most people think starts in Britain, at Bletchley Park. But it doesn't. Crucially, it starts in Poland.
Yeah, long before the war even began, it was a small group of brilliant Polish mathematicians who achieved the impossible. They were the first to reverse engineer the military Enigma using pure mathematics and incredible ingenuity. Then, just weeks before the invasion of Poland in 1939, they made a world-changing decision. They handed over everything they had, all their research, their techniques, even fully working replica Enigma machines, to the British and French. This gift was an absolutely invaluable head start for the team at Bletchley Park.
So let's just quickly trace the path of a single letter, because this is pretty cool. An operator presses a key, the signal goes to the plug board, which swaps that letter for another one. Then it dives into the heart of the machine, 3 rotating scramblers, or rotors. After being scrambled there, a reflector sends the signal back through the rotors for a second round of scrambling. And then it goes back through the plug board for one final swap before the encrypted letter lights up. Now here's the real genius. Every time you press a key, the rotors turn. That means if you type AAA, you get 3 totally different encrypted letters back. That's what made it so incredibly tough.
And this is where Alan Turing's genius really shines. He and his team at Bletchley Park knew a brute force attack on those 158 quintillion settings was pointless. So they built a machine called the bomb. And the bomb bay wasn't designed to find the right answer. It was designed to find all the wrong ones. It would take a small guess, a tiny piece of suspected plaintext, and then it would rapidly check thousands of settings to see which ones created a logical contradiction. It was a machine for eliminating the impossible, and it would tear through millions of potential settings, leaving just a handful for the cryptographers to test by hand.
Which brings us right to the center of our story. The bomb bay was a magnificent piece of engineering, but it couldn't work in a vacuum. It needed a weakness to exploit. And that weakness wasn't in the hardware. It was in the wetware. It was the human operators. The persistent problem of human error.
So this really is the central question, isn't it? How on earth do you defeat a machine that is, on paper, mathematically perfect? And the answer is, you don't. You defeat the person using it.
And here are the cracks in that perfect armor. German radio operators, just like anyone doing a boring, repetitive job, got tired. They got lazy. They fell into routines. They'd use their girlfriend's initials as a message key, or just mash 3 keys in a row like QWE. They'd send weather reports at the exact same time every single day, with the exact same formatting. Every single one of these tiny, predictable habits, this consistent human error, was a lifeline, a gift to the codebreakers of Bletchley Park.
Must take this phrase right here. Keine besonderen Ereignisses. It means no significant events. The codebreakers knew that many German units would send a report every single day, and on a quiet day, it would say exactly this. So they knew that somewhere in that sea of encrypted text, this exact phrase was hiding. These predictable snippets were called cribs, and they were the key that allowed Turing's Bombay to do its work. It was a breakthrough made possible entirely by predictable human error.
But cracking the code wasn't the end of the story. Possessing this incredible secret, which they codenamed Ultra, created a terrible, terrible ethical burden. Because knowing exactly what your enemy is planning comes at a very heavy cost. This put Allied command in an absolutely impossible position. If they acted on every single piece of intelligence from Ultra, the Germans would quickly figure out that their precious Enigma code was broken. They'd change the machine, and the advantage would be lost forever. So, they had to walk this terrifying razor's edge, use just enough information to win key battles, but not so much that they'd give the game away. It forced them to make horrifying choices about who would live and who would die.
A classic and very debated example is the bombing of the British city of Coventry. Over 500 civilians were killed in a massive air raid. Now, many historians believe that Allied command had advance warning from Ultra that a major attack was coming, but they chose not to mount a full-scale evacuation or defense because doing so would have been an unmistakable sign that they were reading German communications. They may have sacrificed a city in order to protect the source.
And the secrecy, the injustice, it didn't end with the war. It continued, leading to the absolutely tragic fate of the man who, perhaps more than any other single individual, was responsible for the Allied victory, Alan Turing.
The contrast is just brutal and impossible to ignore. On one side, you have Alan Turing, the war hero. His work at Bletchley Park is estimated to have shortened the war by at least 2 years, saving, by some counts, millions of lives. And on the other side, you have how his own country treated him after the war. The very government he helped save prosecuted him for gross indecency, for being a gay man, which was a crime in Britain at the time. In 1952, he was convicted and given a horrifying choice: go to prison or undergo chemical castration. He chose the so-called treatment. Just 2 years later, he was dead from cyanide poisoning at the age of 41. It wasn't until 2013, nearly 60 years later, that he was granted a posthumous royal pardon for a crime that should never, ever have been a crime in the first place.
So after all that, what is the big takeaway from the Enigma story? I mean, it's a fascinating piece of history from the 1940s, but its central theme, the persistence of human error, is actually more relevant today than it has ever been. Think about this number. Today, cybersecurity experts estimate that up to 95% of all security breaches are caused by, you guessed it, human error. Phishing emails, using password 123 for everything. Clicking on a shady link, does any of that sound familiar? The technology is a million times more complex, but the core vulnerability is exactly the same. And that is ultimately Enigma's enduring lesson. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Enigma's electromechanical rotors or the quantum encryption of the future. The weakest link in any security chain is almost always the person at the keyboard. Even a system with 158 quintillion combinations was ultimately brought down by this simple fact. Security's always been and will always be a human problem more than a technical one. And that really leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Technology is always advancing, always evolving at this incredible speed. But our fundamental human nature, our tendency to take shortcuts, to fall into patterns, to get a little complacent, that doesn't really change. The story of Enigma isn't just history. It is a timeless, crucial warning about the relationship between us and the perfect, powerful machines we build. And it's a theme we are definitely going to explore in much greater detail in our next synthesis episode.